In the quiet rhythm of daily life, human energy is often scattered without notice. Thoughts rush like wind through an open window. Emotions gather dust in unseen corners. And slowly a person begins to feel heavy, not because life has changed, but because attention has been divided. There is an old simple practice that speaks not of magic, but of awareness. A practice where salt is placed in a quiet corner of the home, not as superstition, but as a symbol, the reminder, a pause in the noise of living. The home is not only a shelter of walls and roof, it is also a space that absorbs intention. Every word spoken within it, every thought carried across its rooms leaves a trace. When life becomes rushed, that space can feel unclear, like water disturbed by too many ripples. In such moments, one is invited to return to simplicity. Take a small amount of salt, place it gently in a clean, quiet corner of your home. Do not rush the act. Do not treat it as something ordinary or meaningless. Instead, let it become a moment of awareness, an act where your attention fully arrives in the present. As the salt rests there, let it symbolize clarity. Let it represent the intention to absorb heaviness, the fatigue of overthinking, the residue of emotional noise, the silent weight of stress that accumulates without invitation. Now observe not with expectation, but with presence. Because what begins to change is not the salt, but the one who notices it. Each time you pass that corner, something subtle happens. A reminder arises. Return to stillness. In that reminder, the breath softens. The mind slows. The body, often tense without awareness, begins to loosen its grip. This is the quiet nature of rituals. They do not force transformation. They invite awareness. And awareness is where energy returns. Many people search outward for renewal, believing something must be added to their lives. But often, restoration begins by removing noise rather than adding more to it. The simple presence of a mindful object in a sacred corner becomes a mirror. It reflects your inner state without judgment. There may be days when you feel nothing at all, and there may be days when simply looking at that space reminds you to breathe deeper, speak softer, and release what you cannot carry anymore. Over time, something subtle unfolds. The home feels less chaotic, the mind feels less burdened. Not because salt holds power over unseen forces, but because your attention has learned to pause again. And in that pause, energy is not lost, it is gathered. This practice teaches a quiet truth. What you repeatedly notice, you begin to understand. And what you understand, you begin to transform. The speech emphasizes that human energy is often lost through scattered thoughts, emotional noise, and lack of awareness in daily life. Human energy is not something that disappears suddenly, it slowly leaks away through unnoticed habits of the mind. Every day, thoughts move in countless directions, pulling attention into worries about the future, memories of the past, and reactions to the present moment. In this constant movement, a person begins to feel drained, not because of physical labor alone, but because inner focus becomes scattered. When attention is divided, energy weakens. When attention is collected, energy strengthens. There is a simple practice that helps remind the mind to return to stillness. It involves placing a small amount of salt in a quiet corner of the home. This is not meant as a magical solution, but as a symbol that carries meaning through awareness. The act itself is more important than the object. When salt is placed intentionally, it becomes a point of reflection within the space where life unfolds daily. The corner where it is placed is not chosen randomly in spirit. It represents a space that is often ignored, just like many thoughts within the mind that are left unattended. By bringing attention to that space, a connection is formed between the outer environment and the inner state. The salt quietly sits there, reminding the observer that just as it remains still, the mind can also learn stillness. Each time a person notices it, even briefly, a moment of awareness is created. In that moment, the continuous flow of mental noise is interrupted. The breath may slow without effort. The shoulders may relax without intention. The mind, even for a second, steps away from its constant movement. These small interruptions of awareness are where transformation begins. Over time, this practice becomes less about the salt and more about the mind that remembers to pause. The home begins to feel different, not because the environment has physically changed, but because perception has softened. There is a subtle shift in how moments are experienced. Instead of rushing through space and time, there is a growing ability to simply observe. This observation gradually restores energy, not by adding anything new, but by removing unnecessary weight carried within. Thoughts lose their sharpness. Emotions settle more quickly. A sense of quiet presence begins to grow in daily life. The salt remains unchanged in the corner, but the one who notices it begins to change from within, returning again and again to a calmer and clearer state of being. Placing salt in a quiet corner of the home is presented as a symbolic ritual, not superstition, but a mindful act to encourage presence and clarity. The practice of placing salt in a quiet corner of the home is not about external power or unseen forces, but about training the mind to recognize simplicity again. In daily life, human beings accumulate tension without realizing it. Conversations, responsibilities, expectations, and silent worries all leave traces in the inner world. Over time, this accumulation feels like fatigue, even when the body has not worked excessively. The true exhaustion often comes from continuous mental activity without pause. When salt is placed deliberately in a chosen corner, it becomes a point of reflection. The corner itself represents stillness within the home, a place that is not frequently disturbed. By placing something simple and natural there, attention is gently drawn toward it. This is where the shift begins, not in the object but in the awareness that returns to it again and again. Each time the eyes or mind notice that small presence, something subtle happens. There is a brief interruption in thought, a break in the constant flow of mental movement. In that pause, the mind has a chance to reset, even if only for a moment. These moments may seem small, but they carry importance. Just as drops of water slowly fill a vessel, small pauses slowly restore inner balance. The salt becomes a silent reminder that energy does not need to be chased outward. Instead, it can be recovered inwardly through awareness. It reflects a simple truth. Clarity does not come from doing more, but from noticing more deeply. When attention is anchored even briefly in something simple and stable, the scattered nature of thought begins to settle. In many cases, people search for solutions in complexity, believing that transformation must come through effort or struggle. Yet often the opposite is true. The mind responds more strongly to simplicity than to force. A quiet object placed with intention can serve as an anchor that gently brings awareness back to the present moment. The salt represents absorption of mental heaviness, stress, and emotional residue, helping the mind associate the space with release and calmness. There are moments in life when a person feels as if their inner strength is slowly fading, even though nothing physically severe has happened. The world continues as usual, but the mind feels crowded. Thoughts arrive without invitation, emotions linger longer than needed, and attention is pulled in many directions at once. In such a state, energy feels fragmented, not destroyed but scattered across too many mental spaces at the same time. A simple practice is often used as a reminder to gather this scattered attention again. A small amount of salt is placed in a quiet corner of the home. This action is not about belief in mystery, but about creating a visible symbol of stillness within daily life. The corner is chosen because it is naturally less disturbed, a place that does not demand constant attention. It becomes a quiet point in a busy environment. When the salt is placed there with awareness, it becomes more than a physical object. It turns into a reminder. Every time the mind notices it, even without conscious effort, there is a brief return to presence. These small returns matter more than they appear to. In a world where the mind is constantly moving forward or backward in time, even a second of stillness becomes valuable. The salt itself does not change anything outside, but it changes the relationship a person has with their own attention. Instead of being completely absorbed in thoughts, there is now something simple that gently calls the awareness back. This repeated act of noticing creates a rhythm of pause and return. Over time, this rhythm influences the inner state. The mind becomes slightly less reactive. There is more space between thought and response. Emotional intensity begins to soften. These changes are not sudden, but gradual, like morning light slowly filling a room. Nothing dramatic is required, only consistency and awareness. The corner of the home also begins to feel different, not because it has physically transformed, but because it has been given meaning through repeated attention. It becomes a place associated with calmness and remembrance, a place where the mind can briefly settle even in passing. The true effect of the practice is not in the object itself, but in the repeated reminder it creates to pause, breathe, and return to the present moment. In the quiet unfolding of everyday life, human beings often underestimate how much energy is lost not through action, but through unconscious mental activity. A person may sit still, yet feel exhausted. They may rest physically, yet remain mentally restless. This happens because the mind rarely stays in one place. It moves constantly between memories, expectations, interpretations, and silent worries. In this constant movement, inner energy becomes divided and weak. A simple practice is sometimes used to bring gentle awareness back into balance. It involves placing a small amount of salt in a quiet corner of the home. This is not a practice of belief in external forces, but a symbolic gesture that supports mindfulness. The salt is not the source of change, the awareness around it is. The corner chosen for this act is important only in its simplicity. It is usually a space that is not frequently touched or disturbed. By placing something intentional there, a contrast is created between the silence of that space and the noise of the mind. This contrast becomes a reminder, not a loud reminder, but a soft one that works through repetition. When a person notices that corner during the day, even for a moment, something subtle happens. The mind pauses its forward rush. Thoughts do not disappear, but they lose momentum briefly. In that small gap, awareness becomes clearer. The breath may deepen slightly. The body may relax without instruction. These are not dramatic shifts, but gentle corrections in attention. The salt itself symbolizes simplicity and stability, does not demand anything. It simply exists. In the same way, the practice encourages the mind to exist without unnecessary movement for a few seconds at a time. These seconds, when repeated over days and weeks, begin to reshape inner patterns. Gradually, the home no longer feels like just a physical space. It becomes a space of reminders where awareness is quietly trained to return. The mind begins to associate the simple sight of that corner with stillness. Without effort, the habit of pausing grows stronger. Over time, this simple act helps cultivate awareness, reduce inner chaos, and restore personal energy by encouraging stillness and mindful attention. In the continuous flow of modern life, it is common for individuals to feel a quiet exhaustion that cannot be explained by physical effort alone. Even in moments of rest, the mind often remains active, replaying conversations, imagining future outcomes, or silently carrying unresolved emotions. This constant internal motion gradually disperses energy. What feels like fatigue is often the result of attention being pulled in too many directions without pause. To bring gentle awareness back to a single point, a simple symbolic practice is sometimes followed. A small amount of salt is placed in a quiet corner of the home. This act is not based on superstition, but on the understanding that the mind responds deeply to symbols and reminders. The salt itself holds no power beyond its form, but the intention behind placing it creates meaning. The corner of the home chosen for this practice is usually a space that remains undisturbed. It does not demand attention, yet it exists within daily sight. This makes it ideal as a quiet anchor for awareness. When something simple and natural is placed there intentionally, it creates a subtle contrast between stillness and mental activity. As days pass, the presence of that small object begins to act as a reminder. Each time the mind notices it, even briefly, a small interruption occurs in the flow of thoughts. This interruption is not disruptive in a negative sense, it is restorative. It creates a moment where attention is no longer moving outward or inward, but simply resting in awareness. In that brief pause, the body often responds naturally. Breathing becomes softer, mental tension reduces slightly. The sense of urgency that often accompanies thoughts weakens for a moment. Although these changes are subtle, they are significant because they happen repeatedly, training the mind to return to stillness more easily over time. The salt in this context represents simplicity and acceptance. It does not change, move, or demand anything. It simply remains. This unchanging presence becomes a reflection of what the mind can also learn to do: remain steady without constant reaction. Eventually, the practice is no longer about the object itself. It becomes about awareness. The corner transforms into a quiet reminder within the home itself begins to feel more grounded, not because the environment has physically changed, but because perception has softened. Over time, scattered energy begins to gather naturally. The mind becomes less reactive and more observant. Instead of being pulled into every thought, there is an increasing ability to notice thoughts without becoming fully absorbed in them. In this way, energy is not restored from outside sources, but rediscovered internally. The salt remains still in its corner, but the one who observes it slowly learns the art of returning to stillness again and again, until that return becomes a natural state of being.